Alright guys, today we are going to be reacting to did Germany just lose its government? Let's jump in and see what's going on.
Breaking news! Germany's government has collapsed. The country is now in a state of anarchy with nobody in charge and it's complete chaos everywhere. Is not what's actually happened, although some sensationalist news headlines might make you think so. To be clear, we still have a government, and in theory, the governing coalition is still in power, although in reality, it's not functioning as a coalition. Although, let's be honest, it never really did function as a coalition, so no change there. What has happened is that the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has fired the Finance Minister, Christian Lindner, and this represents the collapse of the coalition. Scholz also intends to subject himself to a vote of confidence, which could pave the way for an early election. To understand what's going on, you need to understand how a parliamentary democracy works. So here's a quick explanation for those who need it. I thought we'd agreed never to use that ever again. Every 4 years, the German people get to elect 600 or 700 representatives to the Bundestag. The Bundestag then elects a chancellor who becomes head of government and should ideally have the support of more than half the members of the Bundestag. The chancellor doesn't have to be a member of the Bundestag, but usually is. He then appoints a cabinet, again, normally members of the Bundestag. That cabinet then forms the government. In reality, of course, politicians work together in parties and in parliamentary groups. Germany has more than 2 major political parties, and it has a system of proportional representation, which means that it is very rare for one single party to win an absolute majority. So, to be sure of getting the Bundestag votes needed, 2 or more parties will typically work together in a coalition. They will agree on what policies they're going to pursue together, and the Chancellor allocates cabinet posts to the different coalition partners. After the last election, the only viable government was a 3-way coalition between the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP. The problem is that the FDP believes in staying out of debt, but the other 2 parties, particularly the Greens, had ideas for policies that they felt were necessary but would be very expensive. And this was a particular problem because the leader of the FDP, Lindner, was made finance minister, meaning that he had control over how much money the government could spend. Why was he put in charge of the finances? Because the FDP was in a position of being able to say, look, you can't form a government without us, so either we get the finance ministry or the deal's off. A key component of the FDP's philosophy is the debt brake. A debt brake is when a government is not allowed to borrow more than a certain amount of money. In Germany, the national debt must not increase by more than 0.35% of GDP. And this is written into the basic law, which is Germany's constitution, so it can't be overturned without a 2/3 majority in.
Yeah, that's when things get tricky. It cannot be overturned because then if you want to supersede the Constitution, that's when things gets a little bit chaotic.
Bundestag, which they're probably not going to get. But there are exceptions for natural disasters and financial crises. There's more to the debt brake than that, but the basic idea is to keep the country's finances stable. It was passed in 2009, some months before the Greek debt crisis, which was triggered when government spending got out of control and resulted in massive tax increases and austerity measures, which impacted most on the poorest in society, as these things, of course, always do. However, a debt brake can also have negative effects. In particular, it can discourage investment in the country's infrastructure. And most Germans will tell you that right now, Germany's infrastructure is in a very sorry state. That is to say, a government obviously shouldn't be allowed to bankrupt the country, but at the same time, it is sometimes necessary to borrow money in the short term to ensure that the economy stays healthy in the long term. And this is the argument that has plagued this coalition almost since it got started. Every time the SPD or the Greens wanted to implement some reform or other, it was blocked by the FDP, specifically by Lindner. We've known for a long time that the coalition was in trouble, but things really came to a head earlier this week when Scholz begged Lindner to let him override the debt brake. But after all, the country's economy is in trouble, and Lindner refused, at which point Scholz fired him. And Scholz then publicly accused Lindner of being petty-minded and irresponsible, which is the most interesting he's been since he had that eye patch. In return, Lindner has said that Scholz knew full well that the debt brake was a red line for the FDP, and he had presented Scholz with alternatives, but he'd refused to consider them. This isn't actually the end of the coalition. It still remains in power, and so far nobody else has been fired. So I'm just waiting for
I was so naive to understand how things were in Germany. So basically, nothing has happened. I mean, it's just all headline. Germany's still fine, but I didn't know that currently Germany's economy was kind of weak. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. GDP is crumbling right now, and it's clear in the constitution says that you cannot you have to make sure that the country doesn't go in debt. And hey, as an American, you guys should not go in debt. Why is that? Because then the euro or your economy start having problems with inflation, right? So you don't want that. But why? How did we get here again? How did we get to this problem? Let me know in the comment section.
Files to transfer from my camera to the computer so that I can edit them into a video. And while I do that, I'm actually reading a news article about how Lindner has come out in public and has started accusing Scholz of skullduggery. But also, what I didn't realize when I was writing the script for this video is that all the other FDP members of cabinet have resigned their cabinet posts, except for one. And I'll get back to him later on in the video. But we now know for certain that it is terribly dysfunctional. It will probably, though, make it a lot more difficult for the government to get legislation through the Bundestag. So Scholz has announced that he intends to submit to a vote of confidence. This means that he will ask the Bundestag if they still support him. If more than 50% say yes, then Scholz stays in office. If not, then Scholz can, but doesn't have to, ask the president to dissolve the Bundestag and call for fresh elections. Scholz intends to do this on the 15th of January, which means that we could be having elections in late March. And that is actually only a few months earlier than we were expecting. So it is, in fact, not that big of a deal yet. In the meantime, because he says the country shouldn't have to suffer anymore, Scholz has met with Friedrich Merz, the leader of the main opposition group, the Union, in the hopes that he can persuade the Union to support his efforts to get the economy back on track. Effectively, he's hoping to be able to count on the Union to help him get legislation passed, even if the FDP does completely drop out of the coalition. But Merz has responded by demanding that Scholz call for a vote of confidence immediately so that we can have elections even sooner. And from Merz's point of view, that's actually perfectly rational. His party is currently benefiting from the coalition's disarray, so of course he wants elections as soon as possible. And although this video is already longer than I'd intended, I should like to mention Volker Wissing. He's the current transport minister and was a member of the FDP. I say was because he's just resigned from the party, but not from the government. During his time as transport minister, Wissing has said a lot of things that you would expect an FDP politician to say, such as that we need to build more roads. The FDP relies on a lot of support from car manufacturers. But he's also done things that you wouldn't expect, such as efforts to improve public transport. The two big things, of course, have been the Deutschland ticket and the general overhaul of the mainline rail network. And it's here that I can understand his frustration with Lindner. The states and various transport operators have been complaining that the Deutschland ticket is underfunded and that they might need to cut services. The general overhaul is being financed not by actual money, but by moving numbers around on a spreadsheet. But this is now where we're at. Despite the sensationalist headlines, nothing much has changed at all. We've just had confirmed what we already knew. And we're probably going to be voting in the spring instead of the autumn. And that, basically, is that.
Wow, well. So basically, I just want to read some of the comments, because sometimes in the comment section, you can literally, you can see where the sense of the people is. You know, let me see. Which is the most interesting it's been since had iPad. Okay. As a German, thank you for summing up German politics better than most of the German channel. Okay, let me see. So, Scholz reaching out to CDU is like calling your ex-wife for emotional support after a breakup with your girlfriend. Damn. Collapse of the government in Germany is basically the anyway meme from top tier. Well, I think, probably it's almost like a shutdown on the government. That's what I'm understanding. But it's not like that it's collapsing. Like, oh, there's no government. It's just, there's some procedures for this. Then that way they don't have to really, um, how can I say this? That way the country doesn't fall apart. But it's not a collapse. Man, some of these headlines are crazy. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Um, yeah, it seems like they're gonna hold an election next year. This is kind of weird as an American because we don't have things like that happens. Like, oh yeah, we have to hold an election ASAP just to figure out what they want. But I think they're holding elections more like a parliamentary election, right? It's not like oh, you have to go out there and vote for the citizen. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I'll see you in the next one.